Now I'm going to start describing the entire backswing action in great detail. First of all, I'm going to focus on the arm movements in the backswing. Then I'm going to talk about how you pivot in terms of pelvic motion and upper body motion, all the variations, and then how to integrate them together. And of course, I'm constantly emphasizing the principle of the left arm flying wedge. Now, before I start the backswing, there are three principles that you need to understand the complexity of what I'm going to describe. Now, one useful thing to understand when we're talking about the golf swing is if a golfer's at a certain position like that, and I want to describe where is he at impact or just past impact, and you want to use a reference level, a person called Mako Grady had developed a system of giving numerical values to your position at all different times. And I found it a very useful technique to use, and I'm going to start talking about P positions, which refers to a golfer's position at different time points in the swing. So if you would go ahead and demonstrate it to me. At address, that's called the P1 position. Then, during the backswing, you're taking the club back. When the club shaft is parallel to the ground, that's called the P2 position. Then you go further back till the left arm is parallel to the ground. And the club shaft, depending on how much you cock your wrist, could be at different angles. But that's the P3 position there. And then your end backswing is called the P4 position. Then, when the left arm becomes parallel to the ground again in the downswing, that's the P5 position. Then, when the club gets to this position where the club shaft is parallel to the ground, that's called the P6 position. And impact is called the P7 position. Then, when the club shaft now is parallel to the ground here, that's P8. So if you think impact's P7 and this is P8, then halfway between is P7.5, and if you were about there, that's P7.2. So if I said to you, go to P2.5,
2.5?
you would see he's halfway between when the club shaft is parallel to the ground and when his left arm is parallel to the ground. So P2.5 is roughly the mid backswing. And by using the P system, it's very useful to know where you are in your swing action.
Did you want to finish? Doesn't it go to 10?
Yeah, so you can go below P8 to P9, and I very rarely refer to anything beyond P8. There's a P9 position. Now I want to talk about the concept of swing plane, because we had this concept of here is your left arm flying wedge address. And you can see here, I'm swinging the entire flying wedge onto a certain level of steepness. So if you're looking down at the ground, this is on a plane like a pitched roof of a house. And the question is, how do we define how steep it is? That we can, again, have reference values. So Homer Kelly in the Golfing Machine came up with these reference planes. So to understand that, I'm going to get a piece of equipment. This is the concept of a swing plane. I'll just keep that there. So, if you think of a plane as seen from down the line, I'm putting the base of this board on the ball target line represented by that line. And you can see I can vary the steepness of that. So this represents a plane, a degree of steepness. And you could think of it as a leaning wall, or you could think of it as a pitched roof with a certain pitch. So there's degrees of steepness of this plane. And if you would go and hold that for me over there. So if you imagine you're standing at address and I go up and I'm on a plane and the board is parallel to my club shaft, then you could say I'm on a particular swing plane. And the question is, how steep is it at different times. And I will show you that in the average golfer's swing, the steepness increases between P1 and P4, and we have certain ways of defining the steepness. And I'm going to get Jim to perform the swing while I just hold a rod. So stand, let's say with a short iron club, down the line view. So if you notice when he stands at an address, if I put this on the baseline, point your club at the waistline, you'll notice this is on the plane of his club shaft at address. And it points more or less at his belt buckle or a little above it and exits his back over here. That's called the hand plane. And most golfers stand with their arms hanging more or less vertically. Now it's possible to stand with your club outstretched, right? Like Mo Norman would stand. But that's more atypical. Professional golfers tend to stand with their arms like Jim stands, hanging more or less vertically, and then you've got this accumulated number 3 angle. That's the thing. If I point this from the ball target line so that it goes through his elbow, see this is the hand plane, through the elbow here, that's called the elbow plane, and you can see it's steeper than the hand plane. Then there's a third plane, it's called the turn shoulder plane, and to define that plane he has to get to his end backswing position. So if you look at his right shoulder, and you drew a line from the right shoulder to the ball target line, that is called the turn shoulder plane. So there are 3 reference planes. That's the turn shoulder plane, the elbow plane, which is there, and then the hand plane. And you can see that his club shaft is changing planes. So on the hand plane, by his mid backswing, it's probably on the elbow plane, and at the end backswing, his club shaft's on a steeper plane. That's the turn shoulder plane.
And in your website, you said people have 2 planes, right? They go from the hand plane to the shoulder plane.
Yep.
So what did you call it in your website?
Well, if you shift planes,
Shift plane.
you can have a single plane shift where you go, let's say, from the hand plane to the turn shoulder plane. And if you come in the downswing down the turn shoulder plane all the way to impact, and you don't shift planes in the downswing, that's a single plane shift. But if you went up, let's say, from hand plane to shoulder plane in backswing, and then came down to impact to the elbow plane, then you've shifted planes twice. That would call it a double plane shift swing. So what's important to understand is, if you would demonstrate the motion of the left arm flying wedge in space, is it's going back. The whole flying wedge is moving up in space and changing its degrees of steepness. Now there's another very important concept to understand, and that's the concept of being on plane. Now it sounds that if you're on plane, how can you be shifting planes? But there is a way to understand this concept. So this is a critically important concept. And again, this comes from Homer Kelly, TGM book, The Golfing Machine. And he basically stated, and I'm going to demonstrate this from a number of different angles, that when you stand at address, obviously the end of your club, where it's the club end of the hosel, is pointing at the ball target line, or it's even touching it. Then, as you start the backswing, to be on plane, this end of the club that's nearest the ground must always point at the ball target line. If it's always pointing at the ball target line, then it's on plane. Now, seen from down the line here, notice that this shaft is pointing at the ball target line. It's still pointing at the ball target line, still pointing at the ball target line there. But eventually you get to a point here where it's parallel. When it's parallel to the ball target line, yeah, this is parallel to the ball, then obviously the nearest end of the club to the ground can't point at the line anymore. But as you go beyond parallel, which is the P2 position, now P2, 5, P3, notice that this end of the club is nearest the ground. And if this end of the club, an imaginary line drawn through the longitudinal axis of the club shaft, exit in the butt end of the club keeps pointing at that line, then you're on plane. So it's possible to be on plane throughout the entire backswing and entire downswing, and even through the follow-through to a variable degree. And notice that my definition of being on plane is the relationship of this imaginary line drawn through the extension of the shaft in relationship to the ball target line. But while that's happening, you shift in plane. So here my club shaft's on the hand planes pointing at my belt buckle. By here it's a little steeper, it's probably at the elbow plane. You notice how it's going through my right elbow. Now it's going above the elbow plane towards the turn shoulder plane. But as long as an extension of this points at this line, you're on plane. Now, to learn how to perform an on-plane golf swing, you can buy a device like this. This is it's called a smart stick, and it consists of two laser lights at either end. So you can switch on the laser light, and you can see there's a green light that's pointing at the ground here. And there's another green light at this end. You turn both on. So if you watch here, you stand there, notice that the light's pointing at this target line. See? All the way. Now eventually, you're probably not going to see it anymore because of the way the camera's set up. But it's still pointing at the line. Now, notice this button light's on the wall. It's coming down the wall to the line, and it's following the line as I go up. Notice it's still on the line all the way to my end backswing. And then if you want to be on plane in the downswing, notice how that light is pointing at the line, still pointing at the line. Now it's parallel. From here, this end is going to start pointing at the line. What's pointing at the line into impact. So by practicing with this light, you can learn how to perform an on-plane swing in the backswing and the downswing. So go ahead and demonstrate it. So do it in slow motion so that people can see the light. They probably won't see it there because the camera only goes to the edge here. But I can see it. It's going along the line all the way to the wall on the opposite side. Now this one's coming down. It's pointing at the line. Pointing at the line. Notice stop at your end backswing. Okay, it's probably out of the view here, but it's still on the line. Notice that he is still on plane. Now, Jim tends not to go to parallel. It's optional. You can end your backswing in any position. And that's where he likes to have a shorter swing, where this is pointing left of the target. Now, although that's pointing left of the target, this butt end is pointing at the ball target line. Now, in the downswing, do it slowly. You notice it's pointing at this line. There's the green light at the line. Now he's parallel. Now this light's going to shine on it. So you can buy this device, or you can make one yourself. You just buy two laser lights, and you can buy these laser lights, and I'll show you later. And you can mount it on a golf club or on a dowel stick. You could do it with a flashlight even, but it's very difficult to see the flashlight on the ground in a bright room. So laser lights are useful. I will later show you that when you're practicing to be on plane, that it's actually the right arm that is the controlling arm that directs it. But I'm only going to discuss that later, because I first want to discuss what the left arm does in the backswing, and then eventually the right arm, and then other aspects. So, start again at address.
Short club?
Ground's fine. Okay. So now, go to your end backswing. Now, what's the difference between this position of his flying wedge here compared to address? Go back to address. What did he have to do with the left arm to get to that position? Right? There are three motions that occur with respect to the left arm, and I'll demonstrate them. Your arm is pointing at the ground. To get your arm, you had to elevate it in this plane. Notice that he also pulled it across his chest, that's adduction. So it went in this plane, it also went in this plane. But notice this is pointing at the sky, and his was pointing like that. So he had to rotate it. So, demonstrate again. So there are three motions that your left arm has to do. So as he's doing this whole motion, you can see that he's elevating his arm, he's adducting the arm across his chest, and he's rotated it so that the lower of his glove, which would be parallel to his watch face, is angled at the sky, right? Now, while he's doing that, do it again, he's making sure that he's on plane, so that the club in the backswing is always, particularly the butt end here, is pointed at the ball target line. Now, the question is, how do you learn to do this? Because you've got three motions you have to learn. You've got to lift your arm up, you've got to put it across your body, and you've got to rotate it. So where does the rotation occur? Now, if you notice most professional golfers, they stand at address like this. The elbow pit, which again is called the antecubital fossa, is pointed away from the target. It's not pointed at the ball target line, right? It's more angled to the target, which means they don't stand like this at address with their upper arm. It's turned inwards a little bit, like that. And that's a comfortable position. And because it's turned inwards, as they go back, it doesn't change its degree of rotation. In other words, they elevate and lift up the left arm with no rotation. So when you see, here's the flying wedge here, and now the flying wedge is on a plane, steeper plane there. Look at my watch face, it reflects the degree of rotation. That rotation is entirely due to a left forearm pronation maneuver. Now the question becomes, how do you know how much to pronate it? In other words, you say, as you're going back in your backswing, how do you decide how much to rotate it as you're going back? And actually, it's very easy to learn this. And a lot of golf instructors think that this is a big mystery, and they say, well, I think crazy things. Like this. Take the backswing and keep the club head outside your hands. Now, why would you want to do that if your intention is to get the flying wedge, if you could bring me the flying wedge, onto the plane? You see, at the end backswing, we look like that, right? So, if you just think of the flying wedge here, it will go back, and at this point, notice the flying wedge is facing the camera. It's parallel to the ball target line. You notice that the club face, the toe is pointing up, and then you go here, and then you gain onto a plane. So this flying wedge is rotating there to there. You wouldn't, why would you ever think of doing this, turning your flying wedge in that direction, right? And there are some golf instructors who say, pull your hands inside and have your club face like that. In other words, they are resisting the pronation. And I think that's biomechanically unnatural. What you want to do is from the very start of this, as you move your flying wedge back, you're going to be thinking, as your body's turning, so it's a hip motion, upper body motion, the arm is starting to be elevated, it's starting to come across your chest. While it's doing that, it's rotating in a clockwise manner, which is a left forearm pronation manner. Now your question is, how do you learn how much to rotate it? And the answer is very simple. Let me just put this aside again. Come back to the stage. You go there with your driver, let's say, down the line view. So from that position at address, let me stand over here, watch what happens in his end backswing position. We know this is the plane that he's comfortable with. There's no rule that says that your shoulder, left arm should be across the shoulder turn angle. Most professional golfers are either at that angle, maybe a little steeper, or a little below. So you could find what's biomechanically comfortable. Now, notice that the back of his left hand, which is the back of the geometrically flat left wrist, is rotating. So if you look at the logo on his glove, it's turning onto this plane, and that requires a rotary motion, a left forearm pronation. So how much is he pronating? And the answer is simple. The amount of pronation is the amount necessary to keep the club shaft on plane. So go back there and stop at P2.5. So at that point, if this is pointing at the ball target line, then he's turned it enough. Go to P3. This is pointing at the ball target line, and the logo on his glove is on a plane. And the amount of rotation that he required is, if you're thinking of just keeping your club shaft on a plane, it becomes automatic, the amount of pronation. You don't have to think of how much to rotate it. You just say, keep it on plane. Now, what would happen if he over-rotated? So let me show you. So, people say, hey, you mustn't think of getting your toe up, because if you think of getting the toe up, this is called the end takeaway position, the NP2, you're going to over-rotate it. Now, is that over-rotated? Look at my thing. Am I over-rotated? And the answer is yes. You see, because if you look at the butt end of my club, it's pointing way outside the ball target line, right? It should be pointing at the ball target line. But if I stand like this, and I have this, whatever plane's comfortable for me to go on, if this is pointing at the ball target line, then the amount of pronation to get my watch face to be on a particular plane becomes automatic. You don't have to think of it. So once you've learned to keep an intact flying wedge and to rotate the whole flying wedge as a unit onto your desired plane, then it all happens automatically. You don't have to think of how much pronation. And if you overdo it like that, then you've just pronated too much and this is pointing. If you don't do it enough, if you lift it, look where this is pointing now at my feet. That's too little pronation. You want it to be pointed at the ball target line. That's why being on plane is such a critically important concept, that if you're on plane, everything just happens automatically. So go back to the down the line view.
I was going to mention, Jeff, some instructors say to look.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what we're doing, is we're looking to see if we're on plane, to see if our flying wedge is where it's supposed to be.
So let's stop at different positions and ask what's happening. So, as I said, within 6 to 12 inches, you should, if your left wrist is a little bent at rest, you should bend your right wrist back a little bit, which will straighten the right wrist so that this is now in line. Now, let's stop at the P2 position. Notice that P2 is club shafts parallel to the ground. Notice that the back of his geometrically flat left wrist is parallel to the ball target line. And notice that his club face is parallel to the back of his geometrically flat left wrist. And the toe is pointing up. In other words, it's natural that you get to the position. It's not if you have a neutral grip. I will explain that that toe up position happens because when you have a neutral grip, the club face is always parallel to the back of your geometrically flat left and parallel to your lower forearm. So if you, at P2, have rotated your forearm just by the amount necessary to get parallel to the ball target line, then everything should fall into place. The toe should point up and this should be parallel. Now if you had a stronger grip, this would point in all this direction. But if you have a neutral grip, it should be at that position. So when a golf instructor says you should never have a toe-up position because that encourages over-rotation, I don't believe they understand it. Because you can never over-rotate if you're on plane. Now let's go from here to P3. Now left arm parallel. Notice he's on plane, club shaft thing. Notice he still has a geometrically flat left wrist and an intact flying wedge. Club shaft is in line with his arm. Now look at the club face. See the club face up there? It is parallel to the geometrically flat left wrist and the watch face. I like to use the watch face as representing the lower forearm. Notice when I'm doing it here, I'll go at this angle. At this position, my watch face and club face are straight in line. So go back to P3. So if it's not straight in line, then you've disrupted your flying wedge. And you can check this. So you look to make sure that your flying wedge is intact. Make sure that it's on plane. Once you follow those two principles of keeping an intact left arm flying wedge and an on-plane club shaft, you don't have to think of how much to rotate the forearm. Now let's go to your end backswing position. Now, as I said, when he gets to the end backswing position, his shaft is pointing slightly left of the target because he doesn't go all the way to get it parallel. Now, look at the club face at the end backswing position. Is it open or closed? How do you define it? You'll notice that the club face is at about a 45-degree angle to the ground. And a lot of people say that's neutral. Now, I don't believe that you should ever look at the club face relative to the ground to decide whether it's neutral or not. Let me explain why. Go to your end backswing position. And I'm just going to get something that I can use to represent a sheet. So I'll use this flying wedge in backswing position. Now I'm going to put this against this club face to show the angle. So you can see that degree of steepness. Now that looks like it's about 45-degree angle. But what happened if you choose to be on a shallower plane like Ricky Fowler or Matt Cushion? Now his left arm is below shoulder turn angle, and if you look at his face now, it is less steep than before. It's facing more skywards. Now take it up to like Bubba Watson. The left arm is steep. You can see its left arm is going just behind his neck. It's not going to the shoulder turn. He still has a flying wedge. Notice that the shaft, if I put this against the club face, this is steep now. So the degree of steepness of your club face at the end backswing position can vary simply because you varied the angle at which you take up the left arm. And there's no rule to say how steep you should be. It's perfectly acceptable to be in 3 different positions. You could be...
As long as you stay on plane.
As long as you have 2 things. The flying wedge is intact and you're on plane. So let's demonstrate your normal swing, which is a very common position. You can see that his left arm is on the shoulder turn angle. And he's got an intact flying wedge. And you can see the club face angle. Now go to shallow plane, like Ricky Fowler. You can see that the arm's shallow, like Matt Kuchar. But the flying wedge is intact. This is still on plane if it's pointing the ball target line. But the club face angle will look different. And it doesn't matter. Now like Bubba Watson. And you can see. That's why the only thing I look at when it comes to club face angle is not the club face relative to the ground, but the club face relative to the back of your lower forearm, the watch face area, and your geometrically flat left wrist. Because if they're not in a straight line, then you've either bowed it or cupped it. So let's do that. Go to your end backswing position with the intact flying wedge. Now deliberately cup your wrist. See, as he cups it, it twists the club face to be much more vertical. And if you bow it, notice that the club face is more horizontal. But that's not relevant where that's thing. Let's look at it in relationship to his forearm. So go to your end backswing position. Notice that relative to the watch face area on the dorsum, the back of the left forearm, the club face is parallel to this line. Now if he cups it, notice that the club face now is vertical, while the forearm's still in the same position. Now, bow it. Notice the forearm stayed the same, but this now is very closed. It's pointing much more horizontally. And that's a sign of a disrupted or a non-intact flying wedge. So when you want to check your positions, are you doing this correctly? The other thing I didn't mention, of course, we're just talking about the arm, but when we do the takeaway, two things are happening. You're turning your pelvis, and you're also turning your upper body around your rightwards tilted spine, because you're standing at rest with slightly right tilt. And while you do that, you are moving the flying wedge on plane while keeping it intact to your desired position. So he'll do it in slow motion. Watch how he turns his pelvis and upper body while he's lifting his arms. So he's got 3 left arm motions: elevation, adduction, and left forearm pronation. And if you do this, you should be able to do every swing identical. So I want you to do, say, 5 in sequence, and you'll see that he always looks the same at every point in the backswing in terms of the motion of the club and the left arm. So it's just absolutely repeatable. And the checkpoints that you would use at any time you stop, say at P3 again. The checkpoints you would look at is an extension line, is it on plane pointing here? He would look to see the club shaft in line with his arm, and a second way of proving it, make sure that the club face is parallel to the back of the arm. If you meet those criteria, you should be able to perform your backswing every time getting to the same position. And as I said, there is no fixed position. Now, I want you to face that wall, get to your hand backswing position, standing this way. Because I want to force him to go a little further. Okay. Now, notice that's his normal hand backswing. If he was capable of turning more, this would get to parallel. If he had even more mobility, this would cross the line. But it's still on plane if this end points at the ball target line. So you sometimes see some long drive competitors where they can turn, they are so flexible that when they go around, like Jamie Sadlowski, I can go to 90 and he can go to 166 degrees, another 76 degrees of rotation. Therefore, his club goes way back and it's pointing down there. And that's perfectly acceptable if you keep it on plane. Now, there's a common term used called laid off. And a lot of people misinterpret what this term means. And I'm going to explain what laid off really means. So, you go to your hand backswing position here. Yeah. Notice that this is pointed left of the ball target line. And a lot of people say that means you laid off. But that's not correct. Laid off means that you're off plane. So what would cause the club to go to your end backswing? If this is pointing at the ball target line, he's on plane. This means it's pointing left because he has a shorter backswing. Now, I'll show you 2 things that can make it go laid off. If he keeps on rotating his forearm more than the amount necessary, notice that the club falls back. It lays off that way. So that's one thing. The other thing you could do it is if you bow your wrist. So if you bowed your wrist and dropped it like that, it could make the club show. And again, it's off plane. This is not pointing at the ball target line. So when you hear people talk of being laid off, it means you have an off-plane motion, either due to excessive left forearm pronation, more than is necessary to keep you on plane, or it means you've had a wrist motion, a bowing, an arching of the wrist, palmar flexion, which has shallowed the club shaft to an off-plane position. It's not too serious to be off-plane, laid off, because let's say you go up and you're on plane here and you just over-rotate it. It's just slightly flattened. as you start the downswing, it will probably get back in line again. So it's not a major swing fault. I mentioned this more to understand that laid off what the definition really means.
Now, Jeff, some instructors talk about tracing the line versus staying on the line. What do they mean by that?
Well, if you look at the swing as a totality, the only time that this club shaft is on this line is at impact or at address, right? As it leaves in the backswing, it's moving inside. Then the downswing, it comes back to the line. It's on the line. Then in the follow-through, it goes inside again. So there's only a fractional moment of time that it's on the line. And if you try to keep the club shaft on the line, let's say at impact, for 6 inches, that is called steering. You shouldn't be doing that. You don't keep the club shaft on the line. You only keep it tracing the line, which means it points at the line. So you know you're tracing the line if the end of the club that's nearest the ground at any point in time is pointing at the ball target line, as I demonstrated with the laser lights. Right, now we come into the critical role. What does the right arm do? Because you could do this without the right arm. So I want you to do a swing where you keep it on plane, keep your flying wedge intact. Notice he can do it, but you don't even need the right arm to keep the flying wedge intact and to have an on-plane motion. But the right arm can be very useful in helping you to improve all this and to learn things. So there's different ways of performing a takeaway. You might have heard of them if you've been around golf for long enough. The one form of takeaway is called the one-piece takeaway, where the feeling is you move the shoulders, the arms, everything together as a unit, keeping the club shaft, club head as low to the ground as possible, like this. And then notice that I'm not allowing my left wrist to upcock. Even at this position, straight, and then eventually it cocks up. That's the one-piece takeaway. There's another form of takeaway which I think makes so much biomechanical and mechanical sense. And it's used by many of the pro golfers like Adam Scott, Jason Day, Henrik Stenson, Rory McIlroy, and they use a right forearm takeaway. So I'm going to demonstrate and explain the right forearm takeaway, how to learn it, because if you can do it with the right arm, it helps you to solve all the problems of keeping the club shaft on plane. So at address, we normally stand, with this angle, accumulator number 3, and the right arm just comes there with your elbow in your side, and your right forearm's more or less in line with your club shaft. It doesn't have to be perfect, just more or less. You notice mine's in a different angle to my club shaft. There it's on line. I just prefer to have it, my right forearm more vertical. But when I start the takeaway, the feeling is the right forearm is moving back on the plane. Right? It's on a steeper plane than the club shaft, but it stays on this plane and then goes up. Then the following biomechanical motions happen. So you just watch what happens. It goes back. While you're doing that, of course, you're turning your body, which means the right shoulder goes back. You start bending your arm, and you start externally rotating your humerus in the right shoulder socket in this motion. Then you would say, how do you learn how much to do that, and what are your targets? Now, the one concept to understand of the purpose of learning this motion is the concept of the right forearm flying wedge. The right forearm flying wedge is defined as a bent wrist and a right forearm in an angle like that. There's no fix, it doesn't have to be 90, 70 degrees and so on. The right forearm flying wedge is the right forearm and the bent wrist as a unit. It's attached to the body through the humerus. And what you're doing basically in the right forearm takeaway is you're moving the right forearm flying wedge in such a way that it can support the intact flying wedge on your desired plane. So let's presume you want to be on a plane at this point, which is somewhere between the turn shoulder plane and the elbow plane. then your palm must get to a position parallel to your desired plane. And so when you're doing this motion, you say, how do you learn it? And I think the most useful way to learn it is to do what I call the right clap hand maneuver. So normally if we clap hands like this and take bigger and bigger claps, notice how my right arm's going further and further away. But notice that as I do that, and then my body's turning, it goes up into a position behind my right shoulder like that. And a lot of things are happening. Your elbow's bending, the right forearm is supinating because you want to get this parallel to your plane, and your shoulder is externally rotating. Then you would say, with 3 complex biomechanical motions, how would you ever learn how to give the magnitude of each of these motions? And again, it's very simple to learn. So, the way to learn these motions is to learn how to keep on plane with a laser light. So what I've done here is I've taken this laser light out of this device, and I'm holding it in like I'm holding a golf club, with the pointer right by my index finger, and that happens to be called pressure point number 3, which is the first interphalangeal joint of the index finger. So when you stand at air rest, you stand comfortably like that, it's pointing at the line. Notice that as my right forearm goes back, it's still pointing at the line. Now I'm going to do it from here so maybe you could see it for longer. It's pointing at the line. Now I'm at the P2 position when it's parallel, and then I'm going to go up here. Now, to see that it's on plane, you have to turn the laser light and hold it the opposite direction. So when you're here, notice that this is pointing at the line, pointing at the line, pointing at the line. See there? So if you just hold the laser light in your hand and just practice keeping this laser light pointing at this line, you get the feel of it for your desired plane. So I'm going to watch him perform his usual backswing, but now we're going to concentrate on what his right arm is doing at every moment in his backswing, and I'll point them out biomechanically. So at address, you'll notice that this wrist is relatively flat. There's hardly any bend in it. And his forearm is neutral, and it's a little steeper than his shaft plane, which is on the hand plane. This is on the equivalent of what we call the elbow plane, roughly. But when he takes it to P2, notice that he's bending the wrist back to a certain degree. Right? This arm is supinated a little bit, the right forearm, and this shoulder, the elbow is starting to bend, and his humerus is starting to externally rotate to a small degree. Now go to P3. Notice at this point that his elbow is much more bent, and the amount of supination of the right forearm is just the amount necessary to get his right palm to be parallel to the undersurface of the flying wedge. See, he's got an intake flying wedge which is on plane, pointing at the ball target line, and the palm is supporting it. See, so it gets very easy to feel, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It just comes automatically to keep it on plane. So now I go to P4. And again, let's look at his P4 position. How do you know that's desirable? Now, as I said, you have a choice how steep your left arm is at your end backswing. And Jim likes it more or less on the shoulder turn angle. Then notice that the right forearm flying wedge is supporting the club on the inclined plane. And that's a useful function because at your end backswing, the club needs support. The whole flying wedge is there. So you can think of the right forearm as supporting the club. See the bent wrist and the right forearm supports it. Now the question comes, people ask this question all the time, where should your elbow point at your end backswing position? So let's look where his points. I want you to note, and see from this angle, that his right forearm is more or less parallel to his spine, and and this is pointing not quite vertically, it's not vertical. And that's simply because where he goes. Now let's presume he went like Matt Kuchar, or where it was more flatter end backswing position. Notice that his left arm is below that, and notice that this now is more vertical compared to his previous one. Now go to a very steep backswing like Bubba Watson. Now notice that the forearm is extended this way. If you eventually went like some people up there, this could almost become horizontal. And you see that in Rory Sabatini's swing and Steve Marino, see like that. So the question is this abnormal? This is called a flying right elbow. Just do that again. Fly your right elbow. Notice now that it looks very unusual. The right forearm, instead of pointing parallel to his spine or pointing at the ground, is almost horizontal. Is that abnormal? It's not if you understand the principles. Go back. If this was still pointing at the ball target line, even though it's steep, it's still on plane and the flying wedge is intact. And if the right forearm is angled to support it, then that's okay. So what I'm basically saying is it's not so critical where your elbow is pointing or where your right forearm angle is in the end backswing, as long as it has a good relationship to your flying wedge to support it. Now go back again to the end backswing. Now a lot of people say that the angle of the right forearm flying wedge relative to this should be 90 degrees. But I believe that's not true. I believe it could be 70 degrees. You know, notice yours is not 90 degrees. It's 70 degrees. So that's perfectly acceptable. Another question that comes up. So here we are doing a backswing. I'm just going to put this note there. So you're thinking of the right arm. So you could practice this clap hand maneuver just to get the feel of it. Notice I'm clapping hands while I'm turning my pelvis and the upper body. And I'm also making sure that I externally rotate my upper arm, and supinate my forearm to keep this parallel to whatever my desired plane is, to support the flying wedge. So I get the feel of it. Now the question would come is, how close should the right upper arm be to your body? And, does it follow a shirt seam? Is it outstretched? And again, this is a question that you see on golf forums all the time, and the answer is very easy if you understand another principle. So I'm just going to get this piece of string here, and you put this, with a lasso around the left shoulder, and make that tight, snuggle it up. And then you take your club, just to get the idea of the length of your left arm. And you don't necessarily have to fold this up, and I like the idea of just getting rid of this extraneous, because we're trying to create a string that's roughly as representing his straight left arm, more or less the same length, right? Let's get all of that, just it looks neat, right? Straight left arm. If it's not taut, then wind it, right? Go in, backswing with that, right? Now notice, let's do it from this face on angle, that he has no difficulty keeping a straight arm. The question is, what defines this angle here? Why this gap here? And why is the elbow there rather than, let's say, being closer to the body or further from the body? The answer is the amount that your arm, when it does this, what I call the clap hand or the right forearm takeaway movement, the amount that your humerus moves away from the body is the amount needed to keep your left arm straight. So we're going to take away his left arm, and notice this is taut, the swing. That's straight. That's the length of your arm. If you try to push your arm away, you're getting it more than straight. You don't need to get you can't, you develop. If you were too narrow, this becomes slack. So start without your left arm, but go to your address position and get that length right. So, and then, now, stop at say P3. To keep this taut throughout your entire backswing, you're applying a force that's called extensor action. And extensor action basically means you're applying a force in the direction of the longitudinal axis of your left arm. So he's pulling with his right hand in this direction of the left arm, pushing outwards. So to push outwards, this has to move away, right? You feel it. So the amount that it's away is just to keep the left arm straight. Now, how much extensor action you're going to need depends on your biomechanics. So let's watch me. I have a big problem. You notice that Jim can go all the way keeping his arm straight. I have a big tendency to bend it. See how it's bending? It's very hard for me to keep my left arm straight because you want to maintain a constant radius like that. So because I have a tendency, as my right arm is going back, I need to apply extensor action like that to keep it straight. See? So the answer becomes very simple in terms of the right arm motion, how far it is from the chest.
Because, Jeff, it's important to keep the left flying wedge relaxed.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to tighten up this left side to keep this arm straight.
Yeah, you
this
don't
should be relaxed.
Correct. You don't use the triceps muscle in your arm to make this rigid. It's never rigid. It's comfortably relaxed. And then if you notice at the end backswing, most professional golfers have a little bend here, like Jordan Spieth, and this is not perfectly straight. It's comfortably straight. Now there are some golfers like Adam Scott who keeps it very straight. And again, as long as it's comfortable, it's perfectly acceptable to have a very straight looking left arm or a slightly bent left arm. But you don't want it to do what I intend to do, which is this. Look at that degree of bend. Because that narrows the arc. You want to keep it out. Now, let's go to a question about how to measure width of a swing. I mentioned to you that the width of your swing is the length of your left arm. But notice with my left shoulder socket address is here, and as you turn, the left shoulder socket is moving away from the target. And depending on how much slant I have of my upper body will determine the width, right, to my hand. So the width of your swing should be measured biomechanically. You see, it's how far your hand is away from your body. That has nothing to do with your club head. So let me explain that again. Brandel Chambly, has written a book called The Anatomy of Greatness, and he believes that you should use the one-piece takeaway. And one of the principles that he loves about the one-piece takeaway, he says it ensures that you have the maximum width in your swing. And how does he measure width? So let's do it like Brandel Chambly suggests you do it. So you're not going to set your wrist, you're not going to upcock your wrist, you're going to keep it straight, and you're going to keep it. Notice here at the P3 position that his left arm is straight, his left shoulder socket is moved away. This is straight as he can do it. And the club shaft, he hasn't cocked it up yet. And if you measured the width of his swing from the club head to his left shoulder socket, it's much wider than if he had cocked up his thing. So do your normal swing. Notice when his left arm is parallel, he's already cocked up his left wrist. So that's not as far away from the left shoulder socket. But the width of his swing is the same. So that's an important concept. If if you're dealing with a golf instructor and he tells you, oh, move this club head further away, to get width in your swing, then I think he's not understanding the golf swing. Because in the right form takeaway, it's very natural to bend the elbow, and if you bend the elbow, it induces a cocking up of the left wrist, you see. And when the wrist cocks, this is obviously cocked up early. You can cock up early here. You could wait for a while and then cock up. It's still a right form takeaway. Or you could cock up later. But you don't have to unnaturally keep this straight to here and then cock up later, right? And the width of your swing should be measured biomechanically. As long as you have a straight left arm and as long as you feel your left shoulder is moving away, then you have enough width in the swing. And the other point about the one-piece takeaway, and this is Brandel Chambly, who wrote this book, Anatomy of Greatness. He believes that, he writes in his book, that if you cock up your wrist too soon, it's called setting of the wrists, and you get the toe of the club up there, and you keep rotating, pronating your forearm, you're going to get into a position where he says the club face is too open, and when you come in the downswing, you're going to get stuck like this. And I believe that's totally nonsensical, because you can never open your club face too much if you follow the rules of an intact flying wedge and being on plane. So notice that my flying wedge is intact and I'm on plane. And if I'm on plane, that club is open to the degree that it's parallel to my watch face, and it can never be too open. Now what Brandel Chambly is very opposed to pronating your forearm like that, this motion. And he wants the club to be, see there, I'm resisting pronation, that my watch face, instead of rotating onto the plane, is kept facing the ground like this. And then stretched out. But at this point, if you notice that all the golfers who use what's called the one-piece takeaway like this, eventually have to rotate to get to the same end backswing position, right? So let's look at your end backswing position using two techniques. Do the right form takeaway. So that's his end backswing position. Memorize where the back of his geometrically flat left wrist and club shaft are, what the plane is. To get to that plane, he had to pronate his left forearm by a finite amount. Now do the one-piece takeaway. And I do a slow motion, get to P3, straight left arm. Keep it facing a little close, uncomfortable for you.
A little bit.
All right. Keep it, don't pronate, keep this closed a bit so that the toe, in other words, you're avoiding pronation, right? Go a little further, and now get to your end backswing. Notice his end backswing is in the identical position. So if you use the one-piece takeaway, all that it means is you're delaying the necessary pronation to later. But what's the advantage of it? There is no advantage. I think it's biomechanically natural to one, if you have a flying wedge here, and you want to go back onto whatever plane you desire, it's one continuous smooth motion. And on my website I wrote an article reviewing Brandel Chambly's book, and I compared the one-piece takeaway featuring Greg Norman that he used as an example, and I compared it to the golfers like Justin Rose and Adam Scott and Henrik Stenson and so on, to show that they use the right form takeaway, and it makes so much sense, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So good.